Joining me now for our regular political panel is Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite and also Liberal Senator and Shadow Assistant Treasurer Matthias Cormann. I want to first go to the carbon tax, gentlemen, and Matthias Cormann, we keep being told that this is at the eve of destruction, that Australians are really going to notice a big difference on Sunday. Has the Liberal Party and the opposition set itself up for a bit of an anticlimax on this issue?
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, is desperate for people to pass judgment on the carbon tax on day one, on July 1. And, of course, she's put the benchmark for success as low as she possibly can. According to the Prime Minister, as long as the sky doesn't fall in, the carbon tax supposedly has been a success. What we've said all the way through is that the carbon tax will push up the cost of everything. It will push up the cost of doing business in Australia. It will make us less competitive internationally. And because it will make us less competitive and help overseas competitors take market share away from businesses in Australia, it will shift emissions overseas, arguably, to areas where they will be higher for the same amount of economic output. So it will actually not do anything to help reduce global emissions. Now, the truth of the matter is that the economic impact and the impact on the cost of living will be gradual, and it will get worse and worse over time. Julia Gillard is pinning all her hopes in the frog in boiling water syndrome. She hopes that the frog who is in a cold pot of water, and she's put significant additional cold water in up front, additional cash handouts and additional transitional payments, she hopes that the frog is not going to realise that he is gradually being brought to the boil. But the truth of the matter is, unless you remove the pot from the stove, you're not going to save the frog.
All right, okay. Matthias, Matt Thistlethwaite, we're cooking frogs here at the moment. But you must be concerned. We've just heard from those two industry groups in the first part of the program, the Minerals Council and the Australian Industry Group. Obviously, they're very concerned about the impact on the economy. And importantly for you as a Labor politician, they're worried about the impact on jobs.
Well, this is the next phase of our nation's economic development. We take that first step in the next phase on Sunday, and we're confident in the Treasury modelling and the predictions about the carbon price. In respect of your previous guests, I spent a couple of days in the Hunter Valley about a month ago talking to some of the miners up there, in particular the coal miners. Two of them have plans for expansion. They want to expand their operations, and they've told me that they've factored in the minerals resource rent tax, they've factored in the carbon pricing legislation, and their long-term prospects are for growth. Now, that's the reality, and that's the unfortunate disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what these representative associations and indeed the Liberal Party are saying, and they're now changing their rhetoric. A few months ago they were saying Whyalla would be wiped off the map. Now they're talking about frogs boiling in pots. They're changing the rhetoric because they know what they're proclaiming isn't true.
Does the broken promise matter anymore?
Well, look, this is... Labor's always had a plan to price carbon, and we're delivering on that. And we're doing it in a manner that will ensure that households have the assistance that they need to make the transition. Important trade-exposed businesses have the assistance that they need to make the transition. What we're really doing here, Chris, is for the last decade, households have changed their behaviour. They've installed energy-efficient light globes, they've reduced their consumption of electricity. We're now asking businesses to make the same behavioural changes, and that's what the plan is all about.
We'll come back to this issue, obviously, week after week, but this week I want to go to the asylum seeker issue, and firstly, here's a reminder of some of what was said in Parliament this week.
There is a great deal of hypocrisy from time to time in these debates. But I'll say one thing to you. I'll say it deliberately to this Parliament. I will never, ever support a people swap where you can send a 13-year-old child unaccompanied to a country without supervision. Yeah. Never. Yeah. It'll be over my dead body.
I believe that Australia has had a gutful of us fighting on this issue. They're sick of us fighting. They're sick of the politics. They're sick of hearing of more people dying. They're sick of us yelling at each other. And they just want us to fix this.
She's chosen a Pyrrhic victory in this House over legislation that would actually pass the Parliament and would actually make a difference and would actually stop the boats. Shame on her.
Mr Abbott has not moved 1 millimetre in this debate. He has not moved in any way for a compromise on offshore processing. Yesterday he did make an announcement about the number of refugee places. Well, we all want to see more genuine refugees come to this country, but that was not a compromise in the debate before the Parliament about offshore processing.
Well, I think people around the country are shaking their heads. We've seen people dying, politicians posturing, and no action. Matthias Cormann, why wouldn't the opposition just give the government the laws it wants so it can try something?
Well, I mean, it's the government that has created this mess, and if the government can't fix it, the Prime Minister should step aside and let somebody step up to the plate that can. I mean, there are things that the Prime Minister could do today to fix this mess, which is a mess of Labor's own creation. She could pick up the phone to the President of Nauru and of course, re-establish processing on Nauru. She could start negotiations with Papua New Guinea. She could reintroduce temporary protection visas. She could give an instructions to our defence forces and to other border protection agencies to turn boats around when it's safe to do so. And of course, the coalition has made very constructive suggestions this week, and we've been ready to make a compromise. But of course, I mean, the Prime Minister wants to insist on the Malaysia People's Swap deal, which we will not be a party to, because it fundamentally breaches the laws of decency, and of course it won't work. So, I mean, there's some...
Thanks, Matthias. Matt, that is right in that the government could have taken Nauru this week. You could have accepted a compromise and started offshore processing on Nauru. For the Prime Minister, it seems to be Malaysia or nothing.
The advice of the experts to the government is that Nauru will not work. It didn't work in the past and it won't work again.
It worked in the past, so the boats stopped. We know the boats stopped.
The push factors were different, Chris. There weren't as many people seeking asylum at that
That's
time.
just not right.
Nauru didn't work because 90% of the people who were on Nauru, who were found to be genuine refugees, ended up in Australia.
But this is the problem with Labor's argument, in that is a disingenuous use of the figures. 40% of the people who went to Nauru, the asylum seekers who were sent to Nauru, ended up in Australia. It is true to say that 90% of those who were found to be refugees ended up in Australia or New Zealand, but that exaggerates what went on there. Actually, only 40% of the asylum seekers who were sent there ended up in Australia.
And you don't think that the people smugglers know that? They know that. It's not a disincentive. Temporary protection visas aren't a disincentive. What we saw this week, the House of Representatives reached a compromise on this crisis issue. Then it came to the Senate, and the Liberal National Party and the Greens formed an alliance to stop a compromise solution. And unfortunately, that weakens our democracy and undermines the faith of the Australian people in the Parliament.
It is a tragedy that precisely nothing is being done on this issue at the moment. I do not want to let you go, Matthias Cormann, before putting another issue to you, and that is Clive Palmer. Do you support him for a position in the Parliament? That is, he's looking at running for Lilly, the Treasurer's seat in Brisbane. Do you support that bid? Do you think Clive Palmer would be a glorious addition to the Liberal Party backbench?
Pre-selections are matter for the organisations, and I leave that entirely as a judgment for the pre-selectors of the LNP in Lilly.
He's a very prominent figure and a successful businessman. Would you like to see him in Parliament?
Every member of the Liberal Party, is entitled to put their hand up for positions, and of course it'll be up to the people, the pre-selectors of the LNP in Lilly, to make a judgment as to whether he is the appropriate candidate. You don't want to back him, Matthias Cormann? You don't want to back him? Well, I don't have a vote on it.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Matthias Cormann. Appreciate your time. Clive Palmer is certainly making things difficult for the Liberal national parties at the moment. And also Matt Thistlethwaite here in the studio. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure, Chris.
Appreciate your company today. Stay with Sky News throughout the weekend for all the latest in national affairs. See you next week.